It's tough for any new team to enter Formula 1, and that's the case for the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, all the way up until the present day. Because something that we like to think of as being quite a new thing has actually been going on forever. No money, no team. No money, no drive. No woman, no cry. The way it's always been. Juan Manuel Fangio would not have made it to Europe without the Argentine government paying for his boat ticket. Schumacher would never have got in at Jordan without Mercedes paying off EJ. Niki Lauda took out a bank loan to go racing, and the likes of Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen would not be in the sport if Ron Dennis and Red Bull weren't taking a punt on them. And I'd say those punts worked out alright in the grand scheme of things. But for every driver who goes on to big things, there's loads that don't make the grade. Maybe it's because they're at a team that's running on hopes, dreams and a can-do attitude, or that team is so badly run that the drivers themselves are buying their way in just to get on the grid, and then hoping something bigger comes along if they can prove themselves. And in a more recent video I mentioned that between 1992 and 1996 there was something in the region of 8 teams that went under. March, Brabham, Andrea Moda, Scuderia Italia, LaRousse, Lotus, Pacific and Simtech. There's probably 1 or 2 others, but those are the 8 that stick out. Scuderia Italia actually merged with Minardi so that both could stay alive, and there were talks of LaRousse surviving into 1995 as well. Oh, and Pacific and Lotus potentially working together for 1996. But it is what it is. 40 would then collapse mid-1996. In fact, at the start of 1996 there was speculation as to whether both 40 and Minardi would survive. Minardi was relying on paid drivers for survival, and Taki Inui was supposed to be in one of the cars until his sponsors never paid up, so they took on Giancarlo Fisichella instead. Fizzy didn't do the whole season though, and in those cars that year were Pedro Lamy, Tarso Marquez, Fisichella and Giovanni Lavargi. They were the only team to do this in 1996. There's your fun fact for today. But in the middle of all this, there's always 1 or 2 teams that seem to defy the odds and survive, year after year after year after year. Funnily enough, Minardi is one of them. They managed to stay alive between 1985-86 or so and 2005 when they were finally sold off for good and became AlphaTauri or Toro Rosso, whatever you want to call them. But there was another team that had to just sort of stick it out at the back of the pack and gradually make its way forward. That team was Jordan, and they ended up taking on a sponsor that, well, you might not have heard of, but it saved them. And I've said it before, but I'll say it here once again. The antics of Life in 1990 and Andrea Moda in 1992 made what Jordan achieved in 1991, in between those two teams, look like a miracle. Life didn't survive through 1990 because of their car being slower than the F3000 cars of the time, and Andrea Moda was, well, that story's been documented here before. Eddie Jordan had come up from the juniors with his team of misfits, and even though they didn't have the experience of their contemporaries like Ligier, Tyrrell, Leightonhouse and Footwork, they beat the lot of them in 1991. No really, they did. Ligier, no points. Footwork, no points. Leightonhouse got 1 point, Brabham 3, Lotus 3. Tyrrell was their nearest competitor, and Jordan beat them by a single point. This is why I say that Life and Andrea Moda make what Jordan did look like a miracle. Not only that, this was kind of the turning point for Formula 1. The days of turning up with whatever you could scrape together and then find somebody to cover the costs were over. You had to take things incredibly seriously now. And Jordan had. Eddie had managed to get some pretty good sponsors on board for the first season. 7up being one of them, with Pepsi giving them, well, not a considerable amount, but enough money that they wouldn't miss it if the whole thing went tits up. But it didn't go tits up. Jordan managed to get through its first season with some decent point scores. But there was one small problem. Eddie had started the season with something in the region of $7.5 million, and ended the season $3.5 million in the hole. He had to recoup that money, or his team would end up like all the others. So Eddie took on a new title sponsor for 1992 as well as a new engine supplier, and the new title sponsor kind of ties into this what do these sponsors even make videos that I've been talking about doing for some time. I've already done one and I probably will do another list type video later on, but this is about one company specifically, the company that effectively saved Jordan in the early 1990s. Eddie's new sponsor was Sasol, the South African petrochemical company. And it was apparently none other than Ayrton Senna who got the two talking, but I've only seen that claimed once and nowhere else, so take that with a pinch of salt. Sasol was established in the 1950s, and then in the 1960s the company started working on making petrol from coal, because South Africa was being heavily sanctioned due to the apartheid policies. The Germans tried something similar in the war, as it so happens. In 1972 the company figured out a way of making synthetic fuels, and the oil price hike around the world made people look towards Sasol because they weren't using oil like everybody else. But in the late 1980s, reform was taking place in South Africa and apartheid was ending. It ended completely in 1991, and Sasol could now be involved with the Formula 1 team. Sasol wanted to put some money into a team to get some exposure, and Jordan's 1991 season being as good as it was for a new team made them a prime target. Even more so than some of the bigger teams. Although you do need to take into account that the bigger teams had existing deals, like Williams with Canon, Benetton with Camel, and McLaren with Marlboro. And sponsoring Jordan was, well, cheaper too. To put this into a more modern context, imagine the war in Ukraine ending tomorrow, and then in 2027 a team turning up on the grid with a title sponsorship from Gazprom. The deal benefited both sides. Sasol was getting international exposure, which they needed given that they'd largely been working in the shadows because of the already mentioned apartheid sanctions, and it benefited Jordan as well, because they were now up to the tune of 18 million quid. It may or may not have been enough to write off the debts racked up through 1991, but it was still a substantial amount of money, for a team like Jordan that is. Eddie was able to secure some other sponsorships as well. Barclays Cigarettes was one such company, with smaller sponsorship deals through Philips Car Systems, Barango and some others. The resultant livery was the blue of Sasol, the red of Philips and the beige and red of Barclay. Some might say that the livery is a bit all over the place, but if these companies are paying, then it will be the colour they want it to be. The major change in the car was the engine. Yamaha was supplying a V12 to the team for free, and Eddie had only taken this deal on at Bernie Ecclestone's insistence. The plan was, get the engines for free, raise more funds, and then come back in 1993 with a new engine supplier, and go from there. And Eddie was going to have to go through a world of hurt in the 1992 season. It was going to be painful. The car was essentially the 1991 car, which was designed for a Ford V8, but then modified to accommodate an engine that had 4 more cylinders, and the gearbox was now a 7-speed arrangement rather than the typical 6-speed that you found at the time. I think 7-speed was more of a V12 thing than any other type of engine. So the car was running an engine that wasn't designed to fit, and as a result, overheating became the main problem. But it got worse. Stefano Modena failed to qualify on 4 occasions this season, and for the most part the best result the team would get was Gugelmin's 7th at Imola, which would be decent points today, but back then it was the first of the non-points paying positions, which isn't great. Modena meanwhile didn't finish a race until Belgium, where he was 15th, and EJ must have been kicking himself because Michael Schumacher won that Grand Prix, the first of 91. But Eddie then remembered that he'd taken the Michael for a couple of million, so swings and roundabouts. The only point they scored that year was when Gugelmin got 6th at the season finale in Adelaide. They finished 11th overall in the standings and therefore received no prize money. But unlike the likes of Andrea Moda, Brabham, Leighton House and so on, at least they were still around. Sasol continued to sponsor the team through 1993, and with it came a slight livery change, as well as a slight car change. The 1993 car had a slightly higher nose, which was a design choice many teams were beginning to make at this time, and Eddie had managed to secure an engine deal with Hart for some V10s, which were a bit more reliable, a bit lighter, and actually more powerful than the previous Yamaha offerings. As well as this, Jordan brought their first sequential gearbox and ran traction control for the year. But with funds still tight, Eddie had to make a decision. He'd have to get drivers with money to make sure that the team survived. Needs must and all that. Gugelmin and Modena were out, and in was young Brazilian and Tommy Mackinnon lookalike of the year every year, Rubens Barrichello. Rubens was not just talented, but he brought some extra cash of his own. Marlboro was one such place, and Marlboro was the Red Bull of its day. We sponsor virtually anybody.com. He also brought money from Arisco, and Barrichello showed that when the Jordan 193 was working, he could do some decent things with it. Everybody raves about Senna at the 1993 European Grand Prix, but Barrichello probably had the better first lap, going from 12th on the grid to 4th by the end of that first lap. And at one point he'd been running second, having overtaken the all-conquering Williams FW15Cs of Damon Hill and Alain Prost. But the fairy tale wasn't to be. His car would conk out with fuel pressure issues, and reliability would be the main problem through 1993. I know people are going to be quick to point out the 4-driver rule, but what if I was to tell you that Jordan ran 5 drivers in just one car? Yeah, it was a total of 6 drivers, each bringing valuable money and capabilities. Barrichello had one car for the entire season, but in the other car, Ivan Capelli was first, who entered the first 2 rounds of the season and then quit Formula 1 for good after he failed to qualify in Brazil. Following him was Thierry Boutsen, a man who had a reputation of being reliable, fast and having good development skills. And Boutsen was there at the request of Barkley, but his height meant that he didn't fit the car properly and was largely outpaced by the younger driver in the other car. But EJ needed money, so at the Belgian Grand Prix of 1993, that was Boutsen's farewell race, and that was him out of Formula 1. But at the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, Jordan hired a driver called Marco Apicella, an Italian driver who was going to be participating at the Italian Grand Prix. And while Apicella made the grid in the top 26, his race lasted less than 400 yards. And then he never raced in Formula 1 again. He's got one of the shortest careers in Formula 1 history. Literally. Because 400 yards is nothing. Emanuele Naspetti was in for Portugal, but for Japan and Australia was a young Northern Irishman called Eddie Irvine. Eddie knew Suzuka like the back of his hand and had been racing in Japanese Formula 3000. So having somebody who knew the track was of great benefit. Not only did the Jordans finally score their first points of the season, with Barrichello 5th and Irvine 6th, Irvine and Jordan then got loads of free publicity when Ayrton Senna twatted Irvine for unlapping himself. The team were once again 11th in the standings, although equal with LaRousse, who were classified 10th because they had better results over the course of the season. But 1994 was going to be the Great Reset. Driver aids were also going to be banned, and this looked to shake things up. And not only that, Irvine was going to join Barrichello full-time, and they were keeping the Hart engines from the previous year. The 194 went back to the low nose and anhedral front wing as seen on the 191 and 192, and it was returned overall to just a, well, simpler car, and it seemed to benefit Jordan quite well, as they were now starting to show some of that form that they had in their debut season back in 1991. And in doing so, they were showing that this team definitely had something, and that the 1991 season was no fluke. Now they had somewhat of a budget and something that was starting to work. There was no reason why they couldn't start doing a bit better. But the season didn't get off to the best of starts. While Barrichello was 4th at Brazil and the highest placed local driver, Irvine was deemed to be at fault for the collision involving himself, Jos Verstappen and Martin Brundle, for which he was given a race ban. When Jordan appealed, the FIA considered the appeal frivolous and was not going to change anything, so they extended that ban to 3 races for wasting their time. Something that would have been done to Jacques Villeneuve in 1997 at Suzuka when he raced under appeal for the yellow flag stuff. Barrichello then got Jordan's first ever podium at the Pacific Grand Prix at Aida, but was then injured at Imola at the start of that very dark weekend. The livery evolved a bit here too. The beige of Barkley was replaced by the white and red of Arisco, and people say that this makes the colours clash a lot less, but there's a couple of other colours going on as well. A black on the top of the engine cover because of Glass Medic, and a shamrock green last seen on the 191 added because the Irish government was putting some money in. The team would later add Ireland 1 Italy 0 on that green bit in reference to the 1994 World Cup group stage game between the two countries. But that was the thing with these smaller teams in this time. Because there could be so many logos on the cars as teams looked to get as much money as they could, the schemes can look a bit, well, busy, for want of a better term. Remember all the bitching and crying about the HP logos on the Ferrari this season? Wah, it looks bad. Wah, just make it this colour. Look, HP is paying, and if HP says you're not getting a single penny until you paint a breakdancing frog on the car, then you're painting a breakdancing frog on the car. As good or as bad as it looks. To you. And stuff. See the 1994 Minardi for another example of a busy livery. Although you don't see it too often these days because corporate logos are very crisp, clean and designed to work on white and black backgrounds more than anything else. Livery design doesn't mean pick what you want the car to look like. This is why Haas isn't going back to the old Panasonic Toyota colours now they're teamed up with Toyota. Anyway, what was I saying? But there was something about the Jordan 194 that showed that if you go back to basics, you can reap the rewards. When Irvine came back for the Spanish Grand Prix, the car was scoring some decent results. When it finished, Barrichello managed to score a 4th in Italy and Portugal, with Irvine getting 4th and 5th at Jerez and Suzuka, and Barrichello got a final 4th place at the season ender in Australia. Jordan, for all intents and purposes, was back. They were 5th in the constructors again, with way more points than they got in 1991, and with a bigger cushion to the team immediately behind. Ligier this time. But the Sasol deal was going to end, and Eddie Jordan must have been looking at the bank balance thinking, if I don't get something big soon, I could be back to where I was in 1992. But Sasol was staying in Formula 1. The logos departed the Jordan cars and instead swapped to another midfielder. This time, footwork. Although the logos on the footworks were much smaller than they'd been on the Jordans. So why the move? Well, Sasol had developed a good working relationship with Brian Hart and wanted to continue that relationship. So Sasol became the official fuel supplier for Hart engines at the time, and while a couple of my sources say that Sasol was there for 1996 as well, they actually used Castrol fuel in 1996, so I don't know what's going on with that. Jordan, meanwhile, lost the sponsorship for want of a better term, because of things changing on their end. With Peugeot ending their relationship with McLaren and beginning the long and successful Mercedes partnership, Jordan took over the engine contract, and as a result, ended up with Peugeot's fuel partner Total as the title sponsor through 1995. And after 30 years, it's only just occurred to me that the navy blue, white and red on that car is actually the French flag on its side. Well, it looks more like the Dutch flag looking like that, doesn't it? But you've got Peugeot blue, Total red, and then this turquoisey teal colour going on as well, which is my favourite colour as it so happens. But with Total being the title sponsor and all those other logos on the car, it looked like Jordan was covered, literally and financially, for 1995. And with the prize money they received for 5th place in 1994, that would also help. They had Irvine and Barrichello bring in what they brought and would go on to finish 6th in 1995, only a few points behind Ligier. But crucially, both drivers scored a podium that year to get Jordan's best ever race result at that time. Barrichello 2nd and Irvine 3rd at the Canadian Grand Prix behind Jean Alesi, so things were definitely looking up. But the Peugeot still had reliability issues to iron out though. But at the end of 1995, Eddie Jordan signed his new sponsorship deal, one that became kind of, well, his brand, if you want to call it that, but certainly gave Jordan their main identity, this being the Benson & Hedges deal. The 1996 season review VHS tape called it a relief, and it was a massive relief, because it was more money and it meant that Jordan could expand pretty much everything. And the rest, they say, is history. Sasol is one of those sponsors that you might have seen on old pictures and gone, who? And then there's plenty more where that came from. Taking them on as the title sponsor got Eddie Jordan out of a hole and helped him to recover some form that led to the now iconic Benson & Hedges schemes that we saw in the late 90s up to the mid-2000s. From Irish green in 1991 to, well, all manner of colours, to the gold in 1996 and then the bright yellow of 1997 onwards. If there's one thing you can say about Jordan Grand Prix is that they knew how to make a car stand out. They don't make them like that anymore. And that's not nostalgia talking. They really don't. It just shows how much Formula 1 has changed in the last 30 years. But it does make you think, what if Sasol had never come along and effectively bailed Eddie Jordan out? Would Eddie Jordan have survived beyond 1992? It's one thing to consider, but Formula 1 without Eddie Jordan would have been a lot quieter. So then, a look at the Sasol partnership that Jordan had for 3 years in the 1990s. If this has been an interesting video for you, then do leave the video a like so I know I did a good job, and for more stuff from the channel, get subscribed and also get the bell on so you never miss out on anything else that I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the mad lads over at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help keep the lights on around here or help with image purchasing, there's a link to Patreon in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and anything else you might want or need to know. There's also super thanks for any one and done donations and memberships so you can do Patreon style support but without going to Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.